The Scaled dominion stretched across two arms of the spiral galaxy, an ancient regime of perfect order and quiet terror. It had not known real war in over 10,000 standard cycles, and its architects were the Yalaru, tall, bioluminescent beings of translucent skin and silver blood. They did not dominate by force. They didn't need to. The Yalaru were empaths of unthinkable precision, capable of feeling the full lattice of emotions in any sentient being across 100 languages of thought. Deception shattered before them, aggression unraveled, revolution died in its cradle. Empathy was their weapon, diplomacy their fortress. When their ships entered a system, they did not come with bombardment, but with emissaries who disarmed entire civilizations by reading their pain and offering salves too perfect to resist. Entire species welcomed annexation not because they were conquered, but because they believed they had been understood, and those rare few who resisted, beings of chaos or madness, were simply silenced, quietly, without memory. By the standard reckoning of the stars, humanity arrived late. Earth was a blue blemish in an outer spur, disorganized, fractured, still clawing its way past its own atmosphere when the Yalaru first noticed the heat signatures of artificial fusion rising from lunar construction zones. 1,000 species had already bowed to the Dominion, one more barely registered, and yet the initial contact was filed under anomalous. The first empath to set foot on Earth was known as Illyra, third drift of the harmonizing veil. She wore a skin veil of light reactive membranes and walked barefoot across the grasses of New Geneva, Switzerland. The United Human Accord had hastily built a landing zone within 3 days of receiving the Yalaru's projection. 38 world leaders attended the meeting. None had been required to. Every last one came. Illyrith stood before them, surrounded by her escort of 6-winged Lekare, and did what no Yalaru had ever failed to do. She opened herself to the full spectrum of the human emotional field. She staggered. Her voice faltered mid-introduction, flickering across frequency bands as her mind struggled to adjust. Her Lekare tensed, wings folding inward. The humans waited. They had practiced for this moment endlessly. Calm faces, open postures, trust cues, but something in the room was wrong. Illyrith looked at them as if she were seeing not one species, but 1,000 minds screaming in a single skull. You, she whispered, though the words came fragmented through the translation threads. You feel, but not in order. No one replied. A United Earth diplomat, a Ghanaian neurophilosopher named Amara Cole, took a step forward and gestured for permission to speak. Illyrith gave a nod, eyes glassy. We do feel, Amara said, her voice clear, but perhaps not in ways that you expect or want. Illyrith reached out with her mind again. She found pride, fear, loyalty, suspicion, hope, all of it familiar yet somehow wrong. There were jumps, sudden shifts between conflicting states with no apparent cause. There was darkness, true, fathomless, nameless dread, but also something else. Not just defiance, not aggression, something beneath those things. It was a fire that did not correspond to pain or rage. It was hunger without need, desire without object. A forward motion that persisted without being tethered to outcome. It was motion itself, a motion given kinetic shape. It had no Yalaru name. Illyrith collapsed. Her escort swept her up and vanished in a blur of gravitational folds, leaving behind stunned humans and a diplomatic fracture that would not heal for years. The Dominion withdrew its ambassadors from Earth. For the first time in their history, they established quarantine protocols around a newly discovered species. Earth was classified as Category Gray. No further contact, no integration, no annexation. All vessels were forbidden from approaching Sol. Humanity was left alone. But not in ignorance. Years passed. Earth's nations, shocked into unity by the failure of first contact, pushed forward with alarming speed. Lunar bases gave way to Martian terraforming stations. A permanent fleet was built at Jupiter's edge. The dream of the belt became real. Fusion drive freighters carried materials to the outer system. Humanity was not just advancing, it was accelerating. In hidden facilities beneath the ice of Callisto and the craters of the moon's dark side, they began studying the recordings from the Yalaru's presence. Quantum resonance readings, energy emissions, fold drive echoes, empathic fields, everything that had failed to work on humanity had left residue that could be studied. One question drove them. What did the Yalaru see that made them turn away? The answer was not discovered by Earth's military nor its governments. It was uncovered by a subdiscipline of experimental neuroempathics, a hybrid research team of psychologists, rogue physicists, and synthetic empathy engineers. They called themselves Project HFY. Led by Dr. Alexei Vadik and Amara Cole, the same woman who had stood before Illyrith, the team discovered what no species before them had even tried to look for, an emotion without anchor. It did not map to any known neurological state. It triggered no predictable hormonal cascade, yet it persisted in humans across cultures, genetics, and environment. It existed in poverty and wealth, in childhood and age, in trauma and triumph. It was not joy, it was not hate. It was drive. And it could not be read. Because it was not reactive, it was generative. Illerith had called it disorder, but that was wrong. It was order beyond comprehension, purpose without destination. And now that humanity had named it, they began to shape it. While the rest of the galaxy watched the quarantine system in uneasy silence, Project HFY built the first quantum empathic barrier, shielding Earth's research fleets from potential psychic influence. They created vessels without emotional bleed, controlled by partial empath AI nodes, seeded with genetically stabilized humans who could channel HFY's resonance. They left the solar system not with weapons drawn but with minds closed, the one thing no Yalaru could counter. The first of these ships, the ISS Valiant Shadow, crossed the edge of Dominion space on year 2 of the Cold Drift. Illerith, now reclusive, her mind damaged from contact, felt its presence from 1,000 light-years away. And she felt nothing. No signal, no connection, no empathy, just motion, like the tide coming in without the moon. In the capital chambers of the Scaled Core, a Dominion counselor named Sevestal Quarn, non-Yalaru but gifted in pattern warfare, raised the issue. They are no longer passive, he said. They do not seek integration, they are not asking to be understood, they are advancing, and we do not know why. The Yalaru matriarchs responded with unease. How can you fight something you cannot feel? Quarn did not answer immediately, then. You don't. He looked at the galactic maps, at the highlighted gray zones slowly unraveling into branching lines of human exploration. You learn how they fight and then you teach them fear. But no one, not even Sevestal Quarn, understood the real danger. It wasn't what humans could do. It was what they were becoming. And what they would make of the galaxy once they stopped asking permission. The ISS Valiant Shadow vanished into the dark without a trace. Officially, it was charting gravitational anomalies at the edge of the Draxian wastes. Unofficially, it carried something the Dominion had never seen, a full HFY core embedded into a human mind. Her name was Amina Rourke. She had grown up beneath the magnetic storms of Europa's equatorial dome, a child of synthetic gravity and ice storms, of silence broken by the deep thrum of power stations. She volunteered for Project HFY before she could legally vote. By 29, she had survived 9 psyche fracture simulations, 4 full-scale quantum bleed trials, and 1 empathy null feedback event that left her in a coma for 3 weeks. When she woke, she spoke in perfect calm, reciting movement equations for the Yalaru empathic field patterns backwards. They called her the Cipher, and they placed her inside the first human vessel designed not to avoid detection but to deny it. No emotion, no signatures, no resonance. The ship was a ghost, and it moved. What it found beyond the Draxian wastes changed everything. The world was called Reshtha, a derelict outpost long thought abandoned by the Dominion after an incident labeled empathic sterilization. It had been forgotten by most of the galaxy, but the humans had found something in the old Yalaru records, fragmented coordinates hidden in Illerith's psychic cascade during her collapse. Reshtha was the first known failure of Yalaru empathy, a place where something had gone terribly wrong. Rourke walked the shattered halls of the ruin without suit or escort, her HFY core humming at the edge of silence. And she saw, the old walls were scorched with emotion, fossilized memories burned into the substrate like psychic sediment, screams still hung in the air, but not of pain, not of violence. They were questions, they were voices screaming not from despair, but from confusion, as if something had entered this place and broken every law the Yalaru thought eternal. At the center of Reshtha was a mirror. It stood 3 meters tall, a construct of unknown alloy and gravitational curvature. When Rourke touched it, her HFY signature pulsed. For a fraction of a second, the mirror shimmered. And another mind touched hers. It was not human. And it was not Yalaru. It was old. The connection lasted less than a heartbeat. But in that moment, the Valiant Shadow recorded 11.7 terabytes of impossible data, none of which made sense in any known language or physics model. Rourke returned changed, her heart rate had increased by 2 BPM. Her thoughts began to echo in minor harmonic dissonance, but her will was untouched, and she had a message. They thought they were the only ones who felt. They were wrong. The Valiant Shadow did not return to Earth. Instead, it moved deeper, sweeping the edge of Dominion space. And behind it, Earth's other vessels followed, quietly, deliberately, each crew trained in HFY channeling, each ship equipped with null empathic engines. They did not broadcast, they did not speak, but they gathered. The Dominion began to notice. Outposts flickered offline, observation buoys went silent, trade routes twisted as human stealth fleets slipped between monitored zones. For the first time in millennia, the Scaled Dominion's outer worlds began requesting defense reinforcements. The matriarchs responded with caution. We do not act in fear, we act with understanding. But understanding had failed them. So they sent something older than diplomacy. A ship called the Corrales Vorn, a relic of the pre-integration era when the Yalaru had not needed empathy to enforce their will. The vessel was constructed of phase-locked matter and bore a crew of null sentience, beings born without emotional fields, psychically invisible, immune to feedback. The Corrales Vorn was a weapon. Its mission: find a human ship, break it, and bring back a sample. But the valiant Shadow was ready. They met in the Tyvern Expanse. No witnesses, no allies, no communications, a silent duel between a relic of ancient tyranny and the tip of humanity's new spear. The Corrales Vorn opened fire with spatio-temporal imploders, trying to crush the Valiant into a null field, but the human ship moved in ways that defied standard thrust logic. Its engines bent space not just by force but by intent, a projection of drive logic forged in HFY syncopation. The ship dodged not where the weapons were aimed, but where the pilot believed they would be aimed. It was not just evasion, it was prediction beyond programming. The Dominion weapon never stood a chance. In 17 seconds, the Valiant Shadow bypassed its shields, infected its null core with a directed feedback loop using Rurk's own resonance signature, and left it adrift. No casualties, no communication, just silence. The Dominion did not speak of the loss. But the galaxy noticed. Independent worlds on the edges of Dominion influence began to whisper. Systems long considered culturally weak or politically fragmented started receiving visits from cloaked human vessels. No threats, no demands, only messages. We will not feel you, but we will understand you, on our terms. By now, Earth had its own names for the Yalaru. They called them the Empath Kings. And they called themselves the Silent Dawn. But even as their influence grew, cracks began to form. Within the heart of Project HFY, dissent brewed. A second-generation empathic theorist named Solene Vare, once Amara Cole's brightest student, began arguing that HFY had moved beyond containment, that the resonance humans channeled was changing them in ways they could no longer predict. Emotion is not a weapon, she said. It is not a shield, it is the pattern we were built on, and this new silence we wear, it will unmake us before it saves us. But the leaders of Earth's expansion disagreed. They had seen too much, felt too little, and they would not turn back now. Meanwhile, Illyrith, still damaged, still broken, began to dream. In her sleep, she saw fire in the shape of a human face. No empathy, no message, only motion, endless and unstoppable. She woke screaming. The Yalaru began drafting new doctrines, training new minds in something they had long forgotten. How to hate, for humanity, was no longer a curiosity. It was a threat. And something else was moving beneath all of it, something tied to the mirror on Reshtha, something that did not belong to the Yalaru or the humans or even the galaxy as it was now shaped. Rurk felt it too. In quiet moments she saw things in the corners of her vision, patterns in the noise, echoes of voices she had never heard, calling her by names she had never spoken. One word repeated across every echo. Return. But to where she did not know. Not yet. Across the celestial lattice of the Dominion, tension rippled like unseen storm currents beneath glassy seas. Systems that had once basked in the quiet assurance of Yalaru guidance began reporting anomalies. Emotional noise from border worlds grew erratic. Entire colonies developed psychological disruptions that Dominion empaths couldn't trace or soothe. Something was unraveling in the pattern, something their deepest readers could not classify. It was not war. War would have made sense. This was something worse. Misalignment. Where once the Yalaru's empathic sweep moved through sentient minds like wind through grass, it now struck resistance, opaque, irregular surfaces that reflected nothing. The Yalaru described it as void thought, decisions made without emotional vectors, beliefs anchored not in fear or hope or love, but in something else entirely. One name rose in every report. Humanity. Yet even as their expansion continued, Earth's leaders could not ignore the fractures forming beneath their advance. Project HFY had succeeded beyond all predictions, but no one had predicted the side effects. Amina Rourke no longer dreamed like a human. Her dreams were becoming geometric, shapes folding inside impossible spaces, languages formed from architecture, sequences of memory that moved like music but carried no emotional resonance. She didn't feel less, she felt apart, as if her mind was a wheel rotating a fraction out of phase with reality. Imara Cole watched her with growing concern. "You're becoming something new," she told Rourke during a rare moment in Earth's high orbit aboard the prototype station Solace 12. "But evolution without context is mutation. What if we're unmaking what makes us, us?" Rourke's eyes, once sharp with intensity, now glowed faintly in low light, a side effect of the HFY harmonization. Her reply was measured. "We're not unmaking, we're becoming the context." Before Imara could answer, alarms pulsed through the station. Not weapons, not incursions, something stranger. A signal. It came through no known transmission band, it bore no linguistic markers, but the HFY cores registered it instantly, in dreams. Every person with HFY integration awoke at the same moment, whispering fragments of the same phrase. "The mirror has opened." It came from Reshtha. Rourke returned. She descended into the forgotten ruins alone once more, passing the cracked floors and echoing chambers where ancient Yalaru minds had once broken. At the center stood the mirror. It no longer reflected. It showed a world on the other side. Not a metaphor, not a psychic projection, an actual space visible through its surface rippling with alien physics. A black sky lit by towers that bent light into helixes, ground made of liquid metal frozen into shape by thought. She stepped forward. And the mirror let her in. What lay beyond was no place known to the galaxy. It was the origin field, a construct older than the Dominion, older than the Empaths, older than any written language. It was where HFY had begun long before Earth, a place of minds shaped not by emotion but by intention. Here, thought and matter were one. Emotion was a byproduct, not a foundation. It was a realm where beings moved with the weight of meaning, not feeling. They came to her. Not as forms, but as presence, geometric avatars of intention. They had no names, they did not offer alliance or threat, they showed her only one thing. The birth of the first empath. Not Yalaru. Human. Long before the rise of the Scaled Dominion, before the Yalaru had shaped their order across the stars, a human-like species had touched the origin field. They had tried to bind intention to control. It had worked, for a time, then it collapsed. The echoes of their failure had seeded the galaxy with fragments of that ancient resonance. The Yalaru were born from those fragments, but they misunderstood them. They thought emotion was the source. In truth, it had been the symptom. And now humanity had come full circle. The archetype was waking again. Rourke returned through the mirror carrying something inside her, not knowledge, not memory, something deeper, a new strain of the HFY pulse, unreadable even by Earth's own sensors. When she spoke to Imara, her voice vibrated in chords that didn't match the translation algorithms. "We were never the younger race, we were the echo." Earth's High Council met in emergency session. Philosophers debated the implications. Strategists feared what would happen when the Dominion learned that humanity had accessed the origin field. They didn't have to wait long. The Yalaru moved. For the first time in over 10,000 years, they declared total harmonization. It was a doctrine of annihilation disguised as unity. Every system where human influence had been detected would be cleansed, not by weapons, by psychic inundation, saturation fields designed to dissolve selfhood and overwrite intention with perfect Dominion order. The first test was on the mining world of Kestrin's wake. 5 million people gone, not killed, absorbed. The HFY response was immediate. Earth activated the drift net, a fleet of sleeper vessels equipped with emotionless command cores and anti-empathic waveform projectors. They did not warn the Yalaru, they did not demand justice. They counterattacked. The Dominion fleet above Varney's 3 collapsed in minutes, not from force, from disruption. The drift net vessels sent out pulses that didn't destroy matter, they severed connection. Yalaru empaths suddenly found themselves blind, their perceptions cut off, their minds closed within their own skulls for the first time in their species' history. They went mad. Entire Yalaru formations imploded, not physically, psychically. The very order that sustained them fractured under pressure they had no tools to comprehend. And still, Earth did not claim territory. They moved quiet, focused, purpose without claim. The galaxy began to change. Non-Dominion civilizations, long wary of the Yalaru's subtle dominance, began aligning with humanity. Not openly, not in declarations, but in signals, in silent agreements, in shared technologies passed through third hands. No longer beholden to empathy's net, they found new identity in resistance. Solin Vere watched it all with growing fear. "We are remaking civilization in our image," she warned the council, "but we don't know what we are." Too late. Ilirith woke from sleep, her voice ragged, her mind cracked open by the growing resonance in the void. "I felt it," she whispered to her guardians. "I felt her, she's not one of them anymore, she's not even human, she's the next gate." What gate? To the second origin. But only Amina Rourke knew what that meant. And she had stopped asking questions. She was now the question itself. And the galaxy had begun to answer, the Dominion convulsed. Not in revolution, for revolutions implied the will to fight. This was different. It was disintegration, quiet, contagious, spreading not through armies but through uncertainty. Whole planets grew listless. Civilizations shaped by empathic harmonics suddenly felt the absence of certainty as a kind of sickness. Dominion systems flickered like dying constellations, held together only by inertia and fear. Empathy had been their foundation. But empathy only functioned where emotion could be read. And now humanity's expanding influence, subtle, silent, unwavering, was corrupting the lens. More and more sentient minds began resisting harmonization without knowing why. The Dominion called it intent drift, and the Yalaru feared it more than war. At the edge of the Arcos Divide, a Dominion fleet blockaded the cruciform moon of Saren's Hollow. Intelligence suggested a new human node was growing there, seeded from a rogue HFY splinter group. The matriarch sent an enforcer, not an emissary. Her name was Vas Teleri, and she was born without the usual safeguards. Unlike others of her kind, she had never spoken in emotion first. She processed feeling as analysis, fed through psychic frameworks of logic and measured outcome. She had been engineered for one task alone, to understand what made humans unreadable. Her method was simple. She let herself be captured. Brought aboard the human corvette ISS Winterlight, she submitted without resistance. She did not attempt psychic contact, she waited, watched. Her interrogator was a man named Elias Van. He was not a core empath. He had never undergone HFY resonance. He was an ordinary man with an ordinary past, a pilot-turned-diplomat, recruited for his calm under pressure and his ability to listen. "Why did you surrender?" he asked her. "To learn," she replied. "And what have you learned?" Vas tilted her head. "You are not what we believed." "That's clear." "No, not only because we cannot read you, but because you cannot fully read each other, and still, you act, you move forward, you risk collapse at every step, and yet you do not stop. It is not bravery, it is something else." Elias gave no answer. She leaned forward. "We once believed chaos was weakness, now I believe it is foundation." He met her gaze. "And what happens when your people understand that?" Vas Teleri spoke without blinking. "They will cease to be my people." She escaped the next day not by force but by choice. She left no trail. Her mind burned bright and clean with a single new vector, dissonance by design. She would not return to the matriarchs. She would become patternless. A traitor, yes. But something more dangerous. An echo. Back on Earth, Solin Vere took her concerns directly to the Council. She had abandoned her post in the Outer Reach stations and returned to Solace 12 with new data, field reports from allied civilizations showing rising incidences of neuroemotive inversion, individuals developing new emotional states that did not map to any known sentient spectrum. Some had begun experiencing intention-first perception, not reacting to the world, but actively shaping their emotional fields through deliberate belief. "We're changing them," she said, "not with weapons, with our presence alone." The Council, now partially comprised of HFY synchronized minds, listened in silence. "You think that's wrong?" one asked. "I think it's permanent." Meanwhile, Amina Rourke had disappeared from all known tracking, not hidden, absent. She had entered a second mirror. Not Reshtha. A new one, on the dead planet Iranve, where tectonic plates still trembled from an ancient war no one remembered. There, buried beneath kilometers of crystal ash, she had found the twin. This mirror did not shimmer, it spoke. Not in words but in gravity shifts, light fractures, heat waves that shaped themselves into logic. Rourke stepped through. And she was no longer singular. The beings on the other side were not forms, not consciousness as known. They were outcomes made manifest. They had no names, no language. They understood her the moment she arrived, not because they could read her, but because she had become one of them. She returned to known space different. Not altered, aligned. Ships felt her presence before they registered it. HFY cores stabilized in her wake. Human vessels began to navigate chaotic gravitational eddies without computers. Resonance patterns flared into synchronization when she passed nearby. She no longer needed to speak to command. She was becoming the field itself. The matriarchs of the Dominion gathered in final convocation, 7 minds spanning the breadth of the Yalaru's entire empathic history. Their consensus was unbroken for millennia. Now it splintered in 3 directions. One faction called for annihilation. If humanity could not be felt, it must be ended before its chaos shattered all empathic order. They petitioned to awaken the deep flame, an ancient engine of neural inversion used only once in a forgotten age. A second faction called for surrender, not capitulation of power but abandonment of the system. They believed the empathic order had become stagnation, that the rise of the unreadable signaled a natural evolution. To resist, it was to remain trapped in an illusion of peace. The final faction proposed integration. Not through empathy, through drive. They would abandon harmonics, learn to generate emotion, not to reflect but to act. For the first time, Yalaru began requesting human mentors. The Dominion fractured. The Silent Dawn, the name given to the human-led expansion, did not proclaim victory. They did not call it conquest. There were no banners, no broadcasts. They moved as they always had, in motion, not declaration. But something had changed. In system after system, species long enslaved by empathy began remembering what they were before the net. On the war-shattered planet of Venrax, a species once labeled emotionally inert began composing languages of color and vibration. In the shattered rings of Rieka's edge, a lost culture of telepathic mathematicians reawakened and contacted Earth without emotion, only intention. Across the galaxy, life stirred. And at the center of it all was Amina Rourke. She had become a vector, not of domination, of redefinition. But even she had not yet reached the final mirror. It waited beyond the borders of known expansion, a site mapped only in HFY dreams, a structure older than stars, a singularity wrapped in deliberate gravity, where no Yalaru had ever dared go. And no human had yet returned. Until now, the final mirror had no surface. No reflection, no light. It hung in the abyss beyond the charted limit, outside the oldest gravitational currents. No star warmed its edges, no ancient map named it. It was a singularity in perfect containment, a sphere of stillness in a universe of motion. The Yalaru had known of its presence once, eons ago, before they shaped themselves into empaths, back when they were still searching. They named it Vyarxul, the unreadable. But they had buried its memory in silence, because something at its heart had broken the very idea of empathy. Where all other minds offered resonance, Vyarxul offered nothing, not absence, not resistance. Just irrelevance. It was not that it could not be felt. It was that it did not care to be. And now Amina Rourke approached it. Not as a scout, not as an emissary. As a mirror of her own. Her ship, the ISS Ashfall, was not built on Earth. It had been constructed in the hollowed core of a dead star orbiting a planetless singularity, where HFY harmonics could be tested without contaminating galactic patterns. Its hull was composed of motion-stabilized meta-alloy that responded to intention more than mass. It moved through space by recalculating the probabilities of its position, deciding where it would be. No crew, no signals, no tether. Only her. Inside the vessel, she did not pilot. She became the trajectory. As she crossed the last gravitational veil before Vyarxul, every HFY core across the galaxy surged. Millions of human-aligned vessels, stations, and networks registered the shift. For 0.3 seconds, all empathic fields inverted. Yalaru psychics screamed and collapsed. Dominion relay networks bled static. On Earth, Solene Vare, now chair of the Human Continuity Forum, fell to her knees in her observatory, tears streaming down her face. "She's gone beyond choice," she whispered. Imara Cole, now aged, her mind partially fused with early HFY systems, sat in silence beside her. She was always going to. Inside the singularity, Rourke disassembled. Not physically, ontologically. She was peeled apart not by force but by recognition. The structure within Vierxel was not a place, it was a lens aimed inward, a crucible designed to test whether a mind could exist without validation, without being felt, without being named. The Yalaru could not pass. No empath could. But Rourke did not come to be validated. She came to say. Inside Vierxel, she met the last trace of the first pattern. Not a species, not a god, a structure of belief so dense it had survived the collapse of its creators. It had no desire, no doctrine. It existed to pose a single question to any being that found it. Do you move without reason? It was the same question that had broken Illareth. That had silenced Resh-Tha. That had sent the Yalaru into millennia of dominance, fearing what they could not process. Now it faced Rourke. And she answered not in words, but by being. She stood, she stayed, she chose. And in that act she became the answer field, a harmonization not based on reading or feeling, but on recognition that motion itself could be identity. That purpose did not require reflection, that forward movement was the truth. Vierxel fractured. Not violently, it opened. Not physically, ontologically. And its echo went outward. Not in signals, in possibility. Across the galaxy, HFY resonance changed. It no longer created silence. It created new harmonics patterns that could not be mapped, only followed. Where once the Yalaru sought to unify minds, humans had now given them something more terrible and wondrous. Symmetry by design. Empathy became one tool among many. The matriarchs dissolved the Scaled dominion not by surrender but by choice. Many of them joined human enclaves. Others vanished into the deep drift, seeking new understanding. Vast Telleri reappeared on a former war world, teaching new generations of Yalaru how to build emotion from nothing, to feel without reading. The galaxy bent. Not toward war. Toward redefinition. Independent species began forming networks based not on consensus, but on complementary dissonance, alliances of difference. Empathic norms became traditions, not mandates. Whole civilizations emerged in the wake of humanity's chaos drive, building not by approval but by purpose. Earth never declared itself a capital. It didn't need to. Ships came to it anyway, not because they were summoned, but because they chose to come. And at the heart of it all, Amina Rourke no longer held a title. She was a concept now, a story. A being who faced the place where nothing reflected and chose to move forward anyway. The final HFY pulse was not a command, it was a frequency. It resonated with any mind capable of intention, and it said one thing. You are not understood, you are becoming. The galaxy changed. It did not unify, it did not divide. It expanded. And far beyond even the echo of Vierxel, where gravitational thought fields coalesced into presentient dark matter swarms, something else stirred. Something that had watched the fall of the first pattern, the rise of the Yalaru, and now the ignition of humanity's true signal. It did not feel. It did not need to. But now, for the first time in a million star cycles, it moved. Not toward domination. Not toward peace. But toward contact. And it did so without fear. Because now, it knew there was someone else in the galaxy who would understand what it meant to move forward in the absence of recognition. Someone who would not seek to feel it. Only to meet it. There was no triumph, no anthem, no final declaration. Just a quiet certainty spreading like heat from a rising sun. Humanity had done what no empire had ever managed. Not through force, but through becoming unreadable. And in doing so, they made the galaxy new.